You are exhausted from trying to sustain a life that no longer seems to fit who you truly are, living on the edge as if you were wearing armor that is far too heavy every single day. But the great question hiding behind this constant anxiety is this. If you can hear that desperate voice inside your head, judging and demanding from you right now, who exactly is the silent presence listening to it? Pause for a moment and notice this directly. Thoughts are moving, pressure is there, maybe even tension in your chest. But something in you is aware of all of it. That presence is not struggling in the same way the voice is. It is simply noticing. For the next few seconds, don't try to change anything, just observe. Feel your breath, your body, the space around you. Let everything be as it is. This is where the shift begins. Not by fixing the noise, but by recognizing what is aware of it. You know that horrible feeling of spending the entire day performing a role, trying to please everyone, trying not to fail, only to arrive at night with an inexplicable emptiness in your chest? That pain is not your weakness. It is the extreme, energetic and biological cost your body pays to keep alive the illusion of a character society forced you to become. From the moment you wake up, there is already a script running. The way you respond to messages, the tone you use with certain people, the version of yourself you believe is acceptable in each situation. None of this feels optional. It feels necessary, almost like survival depends on getting it right. And in a way, your nervous system believes exactly that. It treats social rejection, failure or disapproval as if they were physical threats. So you adjust, you adapt, you perform. But here's what often goes unnoticed. Every adjustment creates tension. Every time you silence a natural reaction to maintain an image, your body records it. Your shoulders tighten slightly. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your jaw locks without you realizing it. Multiply this by dozens of interactions throughout the day, and what you call normal life becomes a constant state of low-grade stress. And then night comes. The performance ends, at least externally. There are no more eyes watching, no more expectations pressing in. But instead of relief, there is that strange emptiness, a quiet discomfort, sometimes even a sense of not knowing who you are when no one is around. That is the moment where the illusion starts to crack just a little. Because if the character you played all day was truly you, why would it feel so exhausting to maintain? Why would silence feel unfamiliar? Why would rest feel like something you have to relearn? The truth is, what you've been calling yourself is largely a construction. A psychological mask shaped by past experiences, cultural expectations, and the need to belong. It's not fake in the sense that it doesn't exist. It clearly does. But it is an illusion in the sense that it is not your core. It is something you learn to wear, and like any mask, it requires effort to hold in place. Think about how much energy goes into monitoring yourself, watching your words before they come out, replaying conversations in your head, anticipating how others might react, trying to control outcomes that haven't even happened yet. This constant internal surveillance creates a split. One part of you is acting, and another part is observing and judging the performance. That split is where the exhaustion lives, because no system can run like that indefinitely without consequences. Your biology isn't designed for constant self-editing. It's designed for responsiveness, for fluidity, for presence. When you override that natural flow to maintain a fixed identity, you create friction. And friction, sustained over time, turns into fatigue, anxiety, and eventually burnout. What's even more subtle is how this illusion convinces you that the solution is to improve the character, to become better at performing, more confident, more successful, more likable, more in control. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like growth. But if the foundation itself is unstable, then building on top of it only increases the pressure. So you push harder, you refine the mask, you optimize your behavior. And for a while it might even work. People respond positively, opportunities appear, but internally the cost keeps rising. The gap between what you feel and what you show becomes wider, and maintaining that gap demands even more energy. At some point the system begins to protest. It shows up as irritability for no clear reason, as sudden waves of anxiety, as a lack of motivation for things that once mattered, as a quiet question that starts to repeat itself in the background. Why does this feel so heavy? That question is important. It's not a problem to fix, it's a signal, it's your system pointing to the weight of carrying something that was never meant to be permanent. And if you stay with that question long enough, without rushing to cover it up, something else starts to emerge. A curiosity, a subtle shift in perspective. You begin to wonder not just how to improve the character, but whether the character is the right place to look at all. Because if all this effort is going into maintaining an illusion, then maybe the real issue isn't how well you're playing the role, but why you believe you are the role in the first place. And that is where a deeper kind of inquiry begins to open, one that doesn't immediately try to fix the exhaustion, but instead starts to question the structure that creates it. We try to escape this weight in many different ways, but there is a dark mistake, a silent danger that the overwhelming majority of people commit when trying to find inner peace. It is an illusory flaw that actually traps the mind even deeper inside the cycle of suffering. I will reveal exactly what this danger is and how to deactivate it shortly ahead, but first we need to look at the ground beneath your feet through the lens of science. When the pressure of life becomes too much, the natural impulse is to search for relief. You start reading, listening, learning. You explore meditation, mindfulness, self-development, spirituality. On the surface, this seems like a movement toward freedom, and in many ways it is. But hidden inside this search, almost invisible, there is a subtle shift that changes everything. Instead of questioning the structure that creates the suffering, the mind begins to focus on improving the one who suffers. It sounds harmless, even wise. You tell yourself, I need to become more shant, more aware, more evolved. You try to fix your thoughts, control your emotions, upgrade your personality, but look closely at what is happening. The same voice that created the pressure, the same identity that feels incomplete, is now trying to repair itself. This is the illusion tightening its grip, because the mind creates a new version of the character, more spiritual, more balanced, more awake. And then it starts chasing that version as if it were a destination. You begin to measure your progress. Am I calmer today? Did I react less? Am I closer to peace? And without realizing it, you are still trapped in the same mechanism: comparison, judgment, and control. Nothing fundamentally changed. The costume just became more refined. This is why so many people feel frustrated, even after years of inner work. They have more knowledge, more techniques, more awareness of their patterns, but the underlying tension remains. Sometimes it even increases, because now there is an added layer of expectation. You are not just trying to function in the world anymore, you are trying to be a better version of yourself while doing it, and that is exhausting in a deeper, more subtle way. There is also a kind of quiet disappointment that starts to grow. You follow the practices, you apply the teachings, you do what you were told would bring peace. And yet, something still feels off. Not dramatically wrong, but not truly free either. It's like rearranging furniture in a room that still feels too small. This is the moment where most people double down. They assume they are doing something wrong. So they search for more advanced methods, more powerful techniques, more precise teachings. But the direction itself is the problem. Because the fatal mistake is this: trying to use the mind to transcend a problem created by the mind, while still identifying as the one inside the problem. It's like trying to smooth the surface of water while your hand is the thing creating the ripples. And here is where the scientific lens becomes important, not as decoration, but as a grounding point. Your experience of reality is not a direct reflection of the world as it is. It is a constructed model, filtered through your brain, shaped by memory, expectation, and interpretation. What you perceive as yourself is part of that construction, a dynamic process, not a fixed entity. Yet the mind treats it as solid, stable, and in need of constant protection and improvement. That's the illusion at its core, taking something fluid and treating it as if it were permanent. So when you try to fix yourself, you are operating on an assumption that may not even be true. You are investing energy into stabilizing something that is, by nature, unstable. And that creates friction, because reality doesn't cooperate with that effort. This doesn't mean that practices are useless or that growth is impossible. It means the starting point matters more than the method. If the search begins from the belief that there is a solid, separate self that needs to be perfected, then every step forward reinforces that belief, and the cycle continues, just dressed in more sophisticated language. But something interesting happens when you begin to question this foundation. Not intellectually, but through direct observation. You start to notice that thoughts appear on their own. Emotions rise and fall without your permission. Reactions happen before you can control them. The sense of I seems less like a commander and more like a narrator arriving after the fact. This is not a conclusion to believe. It is something to look at closely. Because if what you call self is not as solid as it feels, then the entire strategy of fixing it starts to lose its urgency. The problem begins to shift, not as something to solve, but as something to understand. And that opens the door to a very different kind of investigation, one that doesn't start with changing your experience, but with questioning what your experience is made of at the most fundamental level. Because when you look deeply enough, even the physical world that seems so concrete begins to reveal something unexpected. Quantum mechanics has already proven that matter is not something static or solid. It is 99.9% empty space and waves of probability. Your body, your house, everything around you is pure energy in transition. So if the physical universe is essentially invisible and fluid, why do your traumas, your identity, and your problems feel like iron chains that are so solid and heavy? It's a strange contradiction. On one side, science shows us a reality that is constantly moving, unpredictable, almost ghost-like at its deepest level. On the other side, your daily experience feels dense, fixed, and very personal. A memory from 10 years ago can still hurt as if it happened yesterday. A single thought can shape your entire mood. A label you accepted about yourself can follow you for decades without being questioned. So what's happening here? Your brain is not designed to show you reality as it is. It is designed to give you a stable version of reality that helps you survive. It simplifies, filters, and organizes everything into something that feels solid and consistent. Without that, you wouldn't be able to function. Imagine trying to walk through a world where everything felt like shifting energy fields. You wouldn't last long. So the brain creates structure. It turns movement into objects. It turns processes into identities. It takes something fluid and gives it a name, a boundary, a sense of permanence. This is useful, but it comes with a cost. Because once something is labeled and repeated enough times, it starts to feel absolutely real. Take your sense of self. It is built from memories, patterns, and interpretations. Over time, these pieces are organized into a story. This is who I am. And just like the brain makes a table feel solid, even though it is mostly empty space, it makes this story feel stable and unquestionable. This is where the illusion becomes powerful. Not because it is completely false, but because it is partially true and deeply convincing. You do have a body. You do have experiences. You do have patterns, but the way they are held together, the sense that they form a fixed and separate entity, is constructed. And once constructed, it begins to defend itself. Think about how quickly your system reacts when that identity is challenged. If someone questions your abilities, your value, or your beliefs, something in you tightens immediately. There is a contraction, sometimes even before you have time to think. It feels like something real is under attack, but what exactly is being attacked? Not your physical body in most cases, not your immediate survival. It is the structure your mind built to represent who you are, a pattern of information being treated as if it were solid matter. And because the brain treats it as solid, it responds with real biological intensity. Stress hormones are released, your heart rate changes, your muscles prepare for action. The body doesn't distinguish well between a threat to your life and a threat to your identity. Both are processed through similar pathways. This is how something intangible starts to feel heavy. A thought has no weight. A memory has no physical mass. But when they are reinforced over time and tied to your sense of self, they begin to carry emotional and physiological charge. That charge is what you feel as pressure, anxiety, or pain. And the more you believe in the solidity of these inner structures, the more energy is required to maintain and protect them. Now notice something subtle. Just as matter at the quantum level is not fixed until it is observed, your internal experience also changes depending on how it is observed. The same thought can feel overwhelming in one moment and almost irrelevant in another. The same situation can trigger you deeply or pass through you lightly depending on your state. This doesn't mean you control everything, but it points to something important. Your experience is not as fixed as it appears. There is space in it, movement, possibility, and yet most of the time that space is ignored. The mind focuses on the content, what happened, what was said, what it means about you. It rarely looks at the nature of the experience itself. It doesn't question the solidity of what it is holding on to. That's why problems feel like chains, not because they are inherently solid, but because they are being held in a way that makes them seem that way. If you begin to look more closely, even for a few seconds, you might notice small cracks in that solidity. A thought appearing out of nowhere, an emotion shifting without a clear reason, a moment where the sense of me feels less defined. These are not accidents. They are glimpses of the underlying fluidity that was always there. But this is also where things can become uncomfortable. Because if what feels solid starts to loosen, the system doesn't immediately feel free. It often feels unstable. And when that instability is perceived, your body reacts quickly, trying to restore control, trying to bring everything back into a predictable form. That reaction is not random. It is deeply rooted in your nervous system, in the way your body has learned to interpret uncertainty. And this is where the next layer of the experience begins to unfold, not just in the mind, but in the biology that supports it. This is where the problem escalates and becomes critical. When someone threatens your self-image or things slip out of your planned control, your primitive brain does not distinguish emotional stress from a lethal attack. Your nervous system collapses, cortisol floods your bloodstream, and a simple everyday problem transforms into a terrifying matter of survival for yourself. It doesn't matter if the situation is small, a message that feels cold, a plan that doesn't work, a look from someone that you interpret as judgment. The reaction can be immediate and intense. Your chest tightens, your stomach contracts, your thoughts speed up. In seconds, your body shifts into defense mode, as if something vital is at risk. And in a way, your system believes that something vital is at risk. Because the identity you've been carrying, that carefully constructed sense of who you are, is being challenged. And even though it is an illusion in its structure, your nervous system has been trained to protect it as if it were your physical body. Over time, it learned that maintaining this identity is linked to safety, belonging, and control. So when that structure shakes, the body reacts fast. The problem is not the reaction itself. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do: detect threats and respond quickly. The issue is what it is responding to. It is reacting to interpretations, to mental constructions, to stories that feel real but are not physically dangerous. This creates a constant state of overactivation. Instead of responding only to actual danger, your system is repeatedly triggered by everyday experiences. And because these triggers are frequent, the body doesn't fully return to a baseline of calm. It stays slightly elevated, slightly tense, always ready for the next disruption. You might recognize this as a background anxiety that never fully disappears, a sense that something is always about to go wrong. Even in moments that should feel safe, there is a subtle alertness, a difficulty in fully relaxing. This is what happens when the illusion is not just believed mentally, but encoded biologically. Your body begins to live inside the story. And the more this pattern repeats, the more automatic it becomes. The pathway between thought and reaction gets shorter. A single idea can trigger a full-body response. You don't even have time to question it. It just happens. Then comes the secondary layer. After the initial reaction, the mind steps in and tries to make sense of it. It analyzes, justifies, or criticizes. Why am I like this? I shouldn't feel this way. Something is wrong with me. These thoughts add more pressure, creating a loop where the body reacts, the mind judges, and the system becomes even more unstable. At this point, it can feel like you are trapped inside your own experience. Trying to calm down becomes another effort, another task to succeed at. And if it doesn't work immediately, that itself becomes another source of stress. The system turns against itself, trying to force control where control is not the solution. Because control, in this context, is part of the same mechanism that created the tension. What's often missing in this cycle is a simple but crucial recognition. The intensity you feel is real, but the threat your system is responding to is not what it seems. The body is reacting to the preservation of an identity, not to immediate physical danger. And that distinction changes everything, but only if it is seen directly, not just understood as an idea. If you pay close attention in one of these moments, you might notice something subtle. Before the thoughts fully form, before the story becomes clear, there is just raw sensation, tightness, heat, pressure, movement, the body responding. Then, almost instantly, the mind labels it. This is anxiety. This is bad. I need to fix this. And from that labeling, the entire structure builds itself again. But what if, just for a brief moment, you didn't follow the label? What if you allowed the sensation to exist without immediately turning it into a problem about you? This is not about suppressing anything. It's about seeing the sequence clearly. Sensation first, interpretation second, reaction, then story. And in that gap, however small it may seem, there is space. That space is not dramatic. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It might last only a few seconds, but it is enough to interrupt the automatic chain that keeps reinforcing the illusion. Because once you begin to see that the body reacts and the mind builds a narrative around it, the identification starts to loosen. Not completely, not instantly, but enough to create a different relationship with what is happening. And from that slight shift, something very practical becomes possible. Instead of trying to fight the entire system, you can begin by changing how you relate to a single moment of tension, not by controlling it, but by observing it from a small distance. And that distance, even if it feels almost invisible at first, is where the first sense of relief can quietly begin to appear. To stop this pressure in your chest right now and break the cycle of tension, create a surgical distance from your mind. When anguish tightens its grip, do not say, "I am anxious." Take a deep breath and repeat internally, "I observe that this biological body is feeling anguish right now." Do you notice the immediate relief? You just stepped back and separated the white movie screen from the dramatic film. At first, this might seem like a small shift in language, almost insignificant. But what is happening underneath is profound. You are interrupting the automatic fusion between sensation and identity. Instead of becoming the experience, you are noticing it. Instead of being inside the storm, you are aware of the storm. And that awareness changes the entire dynamic. The pressure in your chest may still be there. The thoughts may still be moving. But something subtle has loosened. The sense that this is me begins to soften. The experience is still present, but it is no longer defining you in the same way. This is what creates that immediate relief. Not because the problem is solved, but because the illusion has been slightly exposed. The mind is used to claiming everything that appears. A thought comes, and it says, "This is mine." An emotion rises, and it says, "This is me." But when you introduce that small distance, the claim weakens. You begin to see that experiences are happening, but they are not the same thing as the one who is aware of them. Try to notice how quickly the mind wants to close that gap. Even after you create this distance, it will try to pull you back in. It might say, "This is just a trick," or "This won't last," or "You're still anxious." And if you're not paying attention, you'll be fully identified again within seconds. This is not failure. This is the pattern revealing itself. Each time you notice the pull and gently step back again, you are training a different relationship with your experience. Not through force, not through control, but through observation. And observation has a very specific quality. It doesn't try to change what it sees. It doesn't rush to fix or judge. It simply allows things to be as they are while remaining present. That alone begins to regulate your nervous system in a way that effort never could. Because the body reads safety not from control, but from the absence of resistance. When you stop fighting the sensation, when you stop trying to push it away or fix it immediately, the system receives a different signal. It starts to come out of defense mode, slowly. You may feel your breath deepen without trying. Your shoulders may drop slightly. The intensity may fluctuate instead of staying locked. These are small signs, but they are real. They show that something is shifting at a level deeper than thought. Now, There is something important to be honest about. This is not a permanent state. The mind will return. The identification will come back. The illusion is not dismantled in one moment of awareness. But each time you create this crack, you weaken the automatic nature of that identification. It's like opening a window in a room that has been closed for years. At first, the air barely changes, but the more often the window opens, the more the atmosphere shifts. And over time you begin to trust this space more than the reaction. You start to see that you don't have to follow every thought. You don't have to become every emotion. There is an option, even if it feels small at first, to remain as the one who notices. This doesn't make you passive. It doesn't disconnect you from life. In fact, it creates a clearer ground to respond from. Because when you are not overwhelmed by the immediate reaction, your actions are less driven by fear and more aligned with what is actually happening. But here is where another layer begins to reveal itself. Even with this ability to step back, there will be moments when the pressure returns strongly. Days when the mind is louder, the body is more reactive, and the distance feels harder to access. In those moments, something deeper is at play. It's not just the current situation. It's the accumulated patterns, the conditioning that has been reinforced over years, the habits of control, the need for certainty, the resistance to unpredictability. And this is where the structure of suffering shows itself more clearly, not as isolated moments, but as a system that has been built over time and continues to operate in the background. Even so, during the hardest days, the character will try to regain control, demanding that you control the flow of tomorrow. The law of entropy proves that the entire cosmos naturally moves toward unpredictability, yet your ego fights against the laws of physics every single day. Trying to force the vastness of the universe to follow the tiny script of your mind is the exact recipe for the collapse of your physical health. Look closely at how this plays out in your daily life. Plans are made, expectations are built, scenarios are imagined. You rehearse conversations that haven't happened yet. You try to anticipate outcomes, to avoid discomfort, to guarantee safety. It feels responsible, even necessary, but beneath that effort there is tension, a quiet insistence that reality should behave in a certain way, and when it doesn't, something inside you resists. That resistance is not random. It is conditioned. Over years, your system learned that certainty equals safety, that if you can predict what will happen, you can protect yourself from pain. So the mind keeps building models of the future, trying to reduce the unknown into something manageable. But life doesn't cooperate with that strategy. No matter how much you plan, something unexpected always appears. A delay, a change, a reaction you didn't foresee. And in that moment, the system tightens. Not because the event itself is catastrophic, but because it violates the internal demand for control. This is where the matrix of conditioned suffering operates. It is not just the external event that creates discomfort. It is the gap between what is happening and what you believe should be happening. That gap generates friction. And the wider the gap, the stronger the reaction. You can feel it in simple situations. Traffic that slows you down. A message that doesn't arrive when expected. A plan that falls apart. These are small things, but the reaction can be disproportionate. Irritation, anxiety, even anger. Not because of the event itself, but because it disrupts the mental script. And the illusion is right there, hidden in plain sight. It tells you that the script is reasonable, that your expectations are justified, that the world should align with your preferences. It makes the resistance feel valid. But it never questions the assumption behind it, that you can control a reality that is fundamentally unpredictable. This creates a constant inner conflict. On one side, reality is moving, changing, evolving on its own terms. On the other, the mind is trying to freeze it, to shape it, to make it stable. These two forces are not aligned, and your body becomes the place where this conflict is felt. That's why the stress accumulates. It's not just about big life events. It's the repetition of small resistances throughout the day. Each time you mentally argue with what is already happening, your system registers tension. Each time you try to force clarity where there is uncertainty, your body contracts slightly. Over time, this becomes your baseline. You may not even notice it anymore. It feels normal to be slightly tense, slightly concerned, slightly on edge. But this normal is actually a conditioned state, reinforced over and over again, and the more it is reinforced, the more automatic it becomes. You don't consciously decide to resist reality. It happens instantly. A situation appears and the reaction follows. The mind moves to fix, control, or avoid before you even realize it. This is the matrix, an invisible system of learned responses that keeps repeating itself. What makes it powerful is that it feels like you. The thoughts sound like your voice. The reactions feel personal. The urgency feels real. So it's rarely questioned. It just runs. But occasionally, something disrupts the pattern. A moment where you notice the tension as it happens, a brief awareness that you are resisting what already is. In that moment, there is a choice, even if it feels small. You can continue the pattern, or you can pause. Not to fix the situation, but to see the reaction clearly. To notice the impulse to control, the expectation that was violated, the tension that follows. This doesn't immediately dissolve the conditioning, but it creates a gap. And in that gap, something important becomes visible. You begin to see that the suffering is not only coming from the outside, it is being generated internally through this constant negotiation with reality, through this demand that things should be different than they are. This recognition can feel uncomfortable at first because it removes the sense that the problem is entirely external. It brings the focus back to how you are relating to what happens, and that can feel like losing control. But what is actually being lost is the illusion of control, not control itself. The system you've been relying on was never truly stable. It was a continuous effort to manage something that cannot be fully managed. As this becomes clearer, another question begins to form more quietly but with more depth. If trying to control reality is part of what sustains this suffering, and if the identity that insists on that control is itself an illusion, then what exactly are you trying to improve when you focus all your energy on developing that identity further? And it is exactly at this point that all the old rules you were taught begin to collapse. They always told you the secret was to heal yourself, evolve your personality, or build your best version. Forget that today. That is the greatest illusion of all. True liberation does not happen when you repair and beautify your character. It happens in the exact millisecond you realize that it never truly existed. This can sound uncomfortable at first, even a little threatening, because so much of what you've learned has been built around improvement, becoming better, stronger, more stable, more successful. And on the surface, there is nothing wrong with growth. Skills can develop, habits can change, your life can absolutely become more functional and aligned, but look carefully at what all of this is centered on. It assumes there is a fixed you at the core, a stable identity that needs to be upgraded. That assumption is rarely questioned, so you begin to invest time and energy into shaping this identity. You analyze your flaws, you try to correct your behavior, you build routines, you set goals for who you want to become. And again, some of this brings real, practical results. Your external life may improve, you may feel more capable, more organized, but internally, something subtle often remains, a quiet tension. A sense that you are never quite there yet, that there is always another version of yourself you need to reach, another layer to fix, another step before you can finally relax. That constant movement toward a better self keeps the mind occupied, but it also keeps the illusion alive, because it reinforces the idea that the self is something solid, something that can be perfected if you just try hard enough. But what if that's not true? What if the self you are trying to improve is not a stable entity, but a shifting collection of thoughts, memories, and reactions? What if it changes depending on context, mood, and environment? What if it is more like a pattern than a thing? Then the entire project of self-development starts to look different. Not wrong, but misdirected when it becomes your only focus. Because you can spend years refining the pattern, making it more efficient, more socially acceptable, more successful. But you are still operating inside the same structure. You are still identified with the character, still believing that this is who you are. And that belief carries pressure. It means every failure feels personal. Every mistake feels like a reflection of your worth. Every comparison becomes a measurement of where you stand. Even your progress becomes something to defend, something to maintain. So instead of freedom, you get a more sophisticated form of tension. You might notice this in moments when you don't meet your own expectations. The reaction is often harsh, immediate. I should be better than this. I thought I had already worked through this. That voice doesn't disappear with self-development. In many cases, it becomes more refined, more convincing, because now it speaks the language of growth, and that makes it harder to question. This is the great lie hidden in plain sight. Not that growth is useless, but that it is incomplete when it is built on an unquestioned identity. You are trying to stabilize something that is inherently unstable, to perfect something that is constantly changing. It's like trying to carve a statue out of water. No matter how much effort you apply, the form doesn't hold. And yet the mind keeps trying. It keeps searching for the right method, the right system, the right approach that will finally make everything click, that will finally bring a sense of completion. But that sense of completion cannot come from improving the character, because the character itself is part of the illusion. This doesn't mean you stop functioning or that you abandon responsibility. It means the center of gravity shifts. Instead of putting all your energy into becoming a better version of you, you begin to question what that you actually is, not as an idea, but as a direct observation. You start to notice how the sense of self appears in different moments, how it feels stronger in some situations and almost absent in others, how it is influenced by thoughts, by emotions, by attention itself. And as you look more closely, the solidity begins to soften. The identity that once felt so fixed starts to reveal its flexibility, its inconsistency, its dependence on conditions. This is not something you force. It happens naturally when you observe without trying to control what you see. And in that observation, something unexpected begins to emerge, a sense that maybe freedom is not at the end of a long process of improvement, but available in a much simpler recognition. One that does not require you to become anything else, but to see clearly what is already happening. And yet, even at this point, there is a subtle trap that can pull you back in almost without you noticing. Remember that dangerous mistake I mentioned at the beginning, the one secretly stealing your peace? The fatal flaw is exactly this: trying to heal the character, using the mind of the character itself. It is fighting an illusion with more illusion. The quantum leap happens when you release the need for control. The void will appear and you will feel fear, but do not run away. It is inside that void that the matrix finally breaks. This is the moment where everything becomes very subtle, because now you are no longer just reacting blindly. You've started to see the patterns. You've noticed the tension, the conditioning, the way the mind builds and defends the sense of self. And yet, even with this awareness, the mind tries to stay in charge. It does this in a very clever way. It turns observation into another tool for control. You might catch yourself thinking, I need to observe better, or I should stay more present, or even, I'm getting closer to freedom. At first glance, these seem like positive thoughts, but look deeper. The same structure is still operating. There is still a you trying to achieve something, trying to get somewhere, trying to control the process. The illusion didn't disappear. It just changed its strategy. Instead of being the anxious, reactive character, it becomes the calm, aware, spiritual one. But the mechanism is the same. Identification is still there. Effort is still directed toward becoming something else. And this is where the trap closes, because now it's harder to detect. The struggle feels more refined, more justified. You are no longer chasing external success in the same way, but internally, the movement is similar. You are still trying to fix, to improve, to reach a certain state. And every time you try to reach that state, you reinforce the idea that you are not there yet. That subtle sense of lack continues. This is why the instruction to let go often feels confusing. The mind hears it and immediately tries to do it. It turns letting go into another task, another goal. How do I let go? Am I doing it right? And just like that, effort comes back in through the back door. But real release does not come from effort. It comes from seeing clearly that the one trying to control the process is part of the process itself. That recognition is not something you manufacture. It happens when you observe without interfering, when you stop trying to adjust the experience and simply notice what is already happening, including the impulse to control. And this is where the void begins to appear. Not as something mystical or dramatic, but as a simple absence. A gap where the usual sense of identity is not as strong. A moment where there is no clear center trying to manage everything. At first, this can feel uncomfortable, because the system is used to having a reference point, a sense of me that is in charge, even if imperfectly. When that reference weakens, there is a feeling of uncertainty, almost like losing your balance for a second. The mind quickly labels this as something negative. It calls it confusion, emptiness, or even fear. And the immediate impulse is to fill that space again, to return to something familiar. But if you stay, even briefly, without rushing to escape, something different can be noticed. The absence is not threatening in itself. What feels threatening is the loss of control, not the space that appears. And within that space, there is a kind of quiet that doesn't depend on circumstances. Not a forced calm, but a natural stillness that was always there, just covered by constant mental activity. This is why running away from the void keeps the illusion alive. Because every time you rush to re-establish control, you rebuild the same structure, the same identity, the same patterns, the same tension. It may look slightly different, but the foundation remains untouched. Staying with the void, even for a few seconds, interrupts that rebuilding process. It allows the system to experience something it is not used to, functioning without constant control. And that is where a deeper shift begins. Not because you are doing something new, but because you are no longer reinforcing what was automatic. The mind may still come back. Thoughts will continue, reactions will still happen, but something has changed in how seriously they are taken. There is a growing sense that they are movements within experience, not the core of what you are. And as this becomes more familiar, the need to fight, fix, or control begins to lose its intensity. But this opening also reveals something even more expansive, something that goes beyond the individual experience entirely. Because when the grip of the personal identity starts to loosen, the boundary between you and everything else is no longer as clear as it once seemed. When this biological disguise loses its control over you, the physics of the unified field and universal spirituality become the same thing. The false division ends. You understand, within your very cells, that you were never a frightened drop, struggling not to dry out on the hot sand. You always were the entire time, the unshakable intelligence of the entire ocean. This is not an idea you adopt. It is something you begin to notice in direct experience. The sense of being a separate, isolated self starts to soften, and what remains is a quiet awareness that does not feel personal in the usual way. It is still here, still present, but no longer confined to a tight identity. At first, this can feel almost too simple to take seriously. There is no dramatic event, no external confirmation, just a subtle shift in how experience is held. Thoughts still appear, emotions still move through the body, the world continues exactly as before, but the center from which everything is perceived feels different, less contracted, less defensive. You might notice that the need to constantly refer everything back to me begins to fade. A thought arises, but it doesn't automatically become my thought in the same way. An emotion moves through, but it is not immediately turned into a personal story. There is space around it, and in that space something becomes clear. Awareness itself is not struggling, it is simply noticing. This is where the illusion begins to lose its final layer of credibility. Because the character, with all its history and patterns, is still present in some form. It doesn't disappear overnight, but it is no longer at the center. It is seen as something that appears within awareness, not something that owns it, like a wave that rises and falls within the ocean, not separate from it. This changes the way you relate to everything. Situations that once felt overwhelming may still have intensity, but they don't carry the same weight. There is less resistance, less urgency to control. Not because you are forcing yourself to be calm, but because the identification with the one who needs to control is no longer as strong. You begin to trust the movement of life more, not blindly, not passively, but with a recognition that you are not separate from it. The same intelligence that moves your breath, that regulates your body without your effort, is the same movement unfolding in everything around you. And this is where science and spirituality quietly meet. When physics points to a field where everything is interconnected, where separation is not as absolute as it appears, it echoes what can be observed directly when the sense of self relaxes. The boundaries that once seemed so clear begin to feel more like useful distinctions than absolute truths. The illusion was never that the world exists, it was the belief that you exist in it as something completely separate. As that belief softens, there is a sense of continuity, not as a concept, but as a felt experience. The distance between inside and outside becomes less rigid. What you see, hear, and feel is no longer happening to a separate observer, but within the same field of awareness. And yet nothing mystical needs to be added to this. You still live your life. You still make decisions, have preferences, respond to situations, but there is less psychological weight attached to it, less need to defend a fixed identity, less fear of losing something that was never truly solid. There is also a natural humility that comes with this. Because if the sense of I is not as central as it once seemed, then the constant need to control outcomes, to prove something, to secure a position, begins to lose its urgency. Actions can arise more simply, more directly, without being filtered through layers of self-concern. And this doesn't make you distant from life. It actually allows a deeper involvement. You can care, create, connect, and participate without the same underlying tension, without the constant background noise of, what does this mean about me? Or, how does this affect my identity? That noise was part of the illusion. As it quiets, what remains is a clearer, more immediate relationship with what is happening. But even here, something important needs to be seen. The mind can take this understanding and turn it into another identity. I am now the observer. I am more aware. I see what others don't. And just like that, the illusion begins to rebuild itself in a more subtle form. That tendency doesn't disappear automatically. It needs to be noticed in real time, just like everything else. Because the difference now is not in achieving a final state, but in continuing to see clearly, without turning that clarity into something to hold on to. And as this deepens, the question is no longer about escaping the world or transcending experience, but about how this understanding moves within the reality you are still living every day. Understanding this does not mean abandoning your business, your dreams, your family, and going to live isolated inside a cave. It is exactly the opposite. Now you have earned the freedom to play this human video game with absolute mastery. You will love intensely, create projects, and live the three-dimensional experience of Earth, but with an unshakable peace, because you know the player is eternally safe outside the screen. What changes is not what you do, but how you relate to what you do. Before, every action carried weight. Decisions felt heavy because they were tied to your identity. Success meant something about who you are. Failure meant something about your worth. There was always something at stake, even in small moments. That constant pressure shaped the way you moved through life. Now that pressure begins to dissolve. You still act, but the action is lighter. There is more clarity because your perception is not constantly filtered through fear or self-protection. You can focus on what is actually in front of you instead of what it might mean about you. This creates a different kind of intelligence in your behavior. You listen more fully. You respond instead of react. You make decisions based on what is needed, not just on what protects your image. And surprisingly, this often leads to more effective outcomes. Not because you are trying harder, but because there is less internal conflict. The illusion used to split your energy. Even challenges begin to feel different. Problems still arise. Life does not become predictable or easy, but the way you meet those problems changes. Instead of immediately turning them into personal threats, you see them as situations to navigate. There is space to think, to adjust, to experiment. This is where a kind of quiet confidence appears. Not the confidence of believing you will always succeed, but the confidence of knowing that whatever happens does not define you in the way it once did. That reduces fear at its root. And when fear is reduced, your actions become more precise. You may also notice something interesting in your relationships. When you are not constantly protecting an identity, you become easier to be around. There is less defensiveness, less need to prove something, less hidden tension. You can actually hear what others are saying instead of filtering everything through your own story. This doesn't mean you agree with everything. It means you are not automatically threatened by difference, and from that, connection becomes more real. There is also a deeper enjoyment of simple moments, not because you are forcing yourself to be present, but because there is less distraction from the constant narrative about yourself. A conversation, a walk, a task, these things feel more direct, less complicated. The experience of life becomes more immediate, and yet you are still fully capable of planning, building, and creating. Mastery does not remove your ability to think about the future. It simply removes the illusion that you can control it completely or that your identity depends on it. You can set goals without being trapped by them. You can pursue something meaningful without turning it into a measure of your value. This creates a healthier relationship with ambition. Instead of being driven by lack or fear, your actions come from interest, curiosity, or a sense of alignment. You move because it makes sense to move, not because you are trying to fix something inside yourself. Even when things don't go as expected, the recovery is faster. Because there is less resistance, less mental replay, less self-judgment, the system resets more easily. You learn, adjust, and continue. This is what mastery looks like in a practical sense. Not perfection, not control, but fluidity. The ability to move with life instead of constantly pushing against it. And still, something remains important to see. The illusion does not disappear completely. It can still reappear in subtle ways, especially in moments of stress or uncertainty. The mind may try to rebuild the old patterns, to bring back the sense of a fixed self that needs to manage everything. But now, there is awareness of that movement, and that awareness prevents full identification. So the game continues, but the relationship to the game has changed. You are no longer lost inside the character, believing it is all that exists. You are playing, fully engaged, but with the understanding that the character is part of the experience, not the entirety of what you are. And from here, a deeper kind of peace starts to become more stable, not as something you create, but as something that was always present, once the projection begins to fade. The main message that brought us here is not just a philosophical concept, it is the definitive law of your cosmic reality. You are not the character, detaching from the illusion of self. The next time fear tries to impose its rules on you, give a silent smile and ask the empty space of your own mind, who does this truly belong to? The world outside will continue spinning, but you have finally awakened from the dream. Nothing needed to be fixed, only seen clearly. And in that clarity, a quiet, untouchable peace was always there, waiting behind the noise. If you reached this point, write in the comments, "I am not the character, I am the awareness." This lets me know you stayed until the end. If this resonated with you, watch one of the videos on your screen now and keep going deeper. And if you want to support the channel and access exclusive content coming soon, consider becoming a member.